Conscience, the final frontier. These are the three-part series of Buddhism 101. Its mission to explore the truth, seek true understanding and the meaning of life, to boldly ask again the questions everyone has asked before.
Hi, my name is Anatta. Welcome to Buddhism 101. In this series, I, as a Christian, will be exploring the three core ideas of Buddhism: three marks of existence, dependent origination, and the Four Noble Truths. These are going to be my personal conclusions from several months of independent study. Today's topic: three marks of existence.
Existence is one of the biggest mysteries to all of us. Where are we from? How did we come to be? What is the meaning of all this? These are great questions many philosophers had explored, and are still being explored by many people in the modern day alike. Buddha was one of the people who pondered it, but instead of trying to ask those questions, he might have had a look at it from a different perspective. According to Buddha, existence is a movement. He proposes that what we understand as an existence is the observable effect of a natural movement that occurs, all according to the nature of reality.
That's a deep rabbit hole to dive into. But let me try to explain.
Buddha states that there are three marks of existence, the truth that governs the reality of all that exists. The three marks are Anicca, Dukkha, and Anatta.
Or in plain English, impermanence, suffering, and non-self.
Let's start with impermanence. Buddha argues that nothing is permanent, meaning nothing stays true forever. This concept sounds easy to understand, yet it might prove a bit convoluting in details. So let's get through this slowly. Buddha says nothing stays true forever, mainly because all that exists conforms to the pattern of birth, decay, and death. Birth in this sense is more than just physical birth, of course. Not only that when a life is born that birth is recognized, but also the conceptualization of an idea, as well as the occurrence of an action, or incident, or a phenomenon. A baby conceived and born into the world is a great example of a birth of creatures. But imagine this. You're walking on the street in a hot summer afternoon. You saw an ice cream truck. You felt like having some ice cream. Now you have an idea to buy some caramel sundae from them. The idea of, let's get myself some lovely caramel sundae, is birthed to you in this example. That is, of course, a birth of idea. And with that thought in mind, an action is then birthed, and the action birthed is you buying that caramel sundae.
Therefore, anything that comes up in life according to Buddha, whether it's people, things, or idea, they all come from something. When they manifest themselves into reality one way or another, their births are recognized.
But from birth, decay. Buddha proposes further that after something is birthed, decay closely follows. Decay in this sense is, of course, the changes that occur to our subject of existence.
Like me getting older every day.
Buddha argues that whatever comes into existence is bound by deterioration of some sort. Creatures like animals and men get older, weaker, and more fragile as our bodies continue to lose their qualities. Science reveals similarly that the organisms are affected by atrophy, the idea of physical degeneration of tissues or organs, from diseases or just simply aging. Ideas and ideologies get the same treatment. An idea conceived can be fresh and exciting, but sometimes the idea starts getting more and more dull. In modern psychology, we have the concept of habituation of thoughts, where the brain stops getting excited from the same idea over prolonged exposure. One might feel like having a burger when they woke up. They might decide against it at lunch once the habituation takes effect. They might choose it instead chicken and waffles. Actions also cannot escape this rule. A ball kicked by Cristiano Ronaldo does not always go up. After a while, the trajectory changes. The ball is traveling lower and lower. Physics shows that the ball kicked up into the air is being affected by the gravity. The gravity pull makes it harder and harder for the ball to maintain its flight without any deteriorations. The initial energy input is being cancelled out. This is what we call the decay of motion.
It's the same reason we can't have perpetual machine. The system always decays. It always requires external input.
And when the decay has taken its rightful place to a proper degree, death ensues.
Death or dissolution.
Just like the kickball with already wasted energy, its flight must stop. The ball shall be grounded and all movements shall be nullified. That is death. Death of a living being is also extremely clear. When the system fails, when the brain or the heart stops working, or when your lungs cannot breathe any further, you cease to exist. Ideas can be forgotten, especially when we look at the history where cultures are lost to time. Languages died because no one knows what they mean or even sound like anymore. Even stars have their own ends. Scientists today can give you calculations on how long some of the stars have been active and how long until they are going to implode into supernovas and go touch some space daisies. Death is the end of a journey. It is an inevitable part of it.
If that doesn't convince you, let's try an exercise that Buddha had left us.
Try observing your breathing cycle. This is called anapanasati, or the breathing exercise. Every breathing cycle we take is the most intimate proof of impermanence. The cycle starts with breathing in. That's the birth of an action. Your lungs gather in the air to its maximum capacity. But no matter how hard you inhale, the strength of your inhalation falters. As your lung capacity is getting maxed out, decay has settled in. The moment the lung capacity is filled, the lungs cannot take more air. The inhalation is now over. The cycle moves to the next step, where the exhalation starts. You exhale the air out, the exhalation slows down to its finishing point, and the cycle restarts. No breath can be held forever, and to force yourself not to breathe is to go against the movement of reality.
In short, nothing is permanent, because after their birth, all things decay. And after a certain level of decay, they die. You, me, and everything we see, all the same.
And that leads right into the second mark of existence. Suffering. Suffering is a part of existence. According to Buddha, he says that it is a fundamental condition of beings. He says that it is everywhere. It is the feeling of unsatisfactoriness, discomfort, or undesirable state of emotions we experience every moment of existence. It occurs mainly because of two root causes, avijja and tanha, ignorance and craving. Buddha explains the nature of suffering in great details throughout his teachings, but the simple idea is this. One suffers an experience because they either do not understand the nature of reality as is, or they do understand it, but was captivated by the cravings that bind them. These are not to be mistaken as a failure of an agent who falls prey to them, but natural conditions that occur to us from our own limitations. Taoism says human is limited, but Tao is boundless. That essentially means there are more things humans do not know than the human capacity to know things. Thus, Ignorance is just a natural occurrence for when we encounter the new things in life. Craving is also the same. Although we do like to think that craving is voluntary, Buddha claims that it is a natural process. Think hunger. Although we do understand hunger and its nature, it would be tough for us not to gobble some burgers when they're right there in front of us after a 3-day lost in the forest without supply. Your body craves nutrients, and it will drive you to consume something. Buddha explains that there is an attachment formed when we encounter a phenomenon in life. In this example, when you feel the hunger, you tend to focus on the feeling that you're hungry and that you need to eat. And the more you think about it, you get hungrier and hungrier. The attachment to the feeling occurred is the root of the problem. But to make it even clearer, how about a completely different example?
Imagine Billy. Billy got a puppy for his birthday presents when he turned 7.
The puppy was a cute golden retriever. It was only a month old and they got along really fast. Billy loved him, called him Sparky, and he loved how his tiny feet clumsily touched the ground. Billy did not know that before long, Sparky would grow. And 6 months later, Sparky grew bigger than him.
Billy cried his eyes out because the little puppy he loved now grew up to be a huge dog, twice his size.
Although it sounds silly, Billy's feelings are real. He did not know that the dog would grow, and now that it became something he did not imagine, he felt sad and wished to have his little puppy back. Only when the parents successfully explained to him that all things grow, and that his puppy turning into a giant pile of fur is normal, he started to feel all right, and embraced Sparky once more.
In other words, he suffered because he did not understand that change was a part of life. And now that he did, his suffering ceased.
Now imagine 20 years later. Billy is 27 years old. He is working in the small town he grew up in. Sparky is not young anymore. 20 years times 7 is 140, and it does chill. Billy finished high school already, long ago, and of course, he had been taught the concept of death. He actually went to some funerals when some friends of the family departed.
But when Sparky fell ill, it's different. He just couldn't take it.
Although he understands now as an adult that all creatures on God's green earth die, the bond he had with Sparky was too precious. The day he died, he skipped work. He cried like a baby. Like the day he cried when Sparky grew too big and he didn't know that it would. He spent a considerable amount of time to decide whether he would let the vet put Sparky to sleep because it just couldn't move anymore, or try his best to keep it alive with all the medical supports. The grief was real. The suffering was real, even when Billy knows this truth of death and impermanence. The sadness he felt for his best friend was still there.
Truth is known. The attachment is strong. It binds us.
Suffering is a part of life, whether you like it or not. But it's not something to despair, because there's still this concept of non-self we have yet to explore. The concept of non-self, according to Buddha, is not a rejection of self in the sense that self is not real in terms of its existence. Self is not real in this case means the self is not a static object. It is but a continuous movement or changes in reality we recognize and categorize as self.
Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. He thought, therefore he was.
Self, according to many psychological narratives, is of course a construct. You, me, and everything we see are not ourselves because we just happen to be ourselves intrinsically. And self in this case is not just self as you and me and everyone we love. The self in this subject also has its meaning extended into the concept of subject, entity, pattern, or anything we recognize as something in a broader sense. To try and explain this, I will borrow from the Greeks one of their famous puzzles.
The ship of Theseus.
Imagine this. In the time of Greek myth, there was this hero named Theseus. Theseus was bestowed a ship for his adventure. The ship was majestic, and the people called it the ship of Theseus. However, after some time, something broke. Decay settled in. Parts of the ship needed changing. And because Theseus was a great hero, help was always available. The broken parts of the ship, one by one, replaced by a master carpenter. At first, a piece of the hull, then pieces of the starboard, then the deck, then the headpiece. Now, before long, almost all parts of the ship had been replaced. Is this still the ship of Theseus? Or how long before something, when changed little by little, becomes something new? Or does its essence still remain somewhere, despite all of the changes? What is the essence of this subject called ship of Theseus exactly?
Or one more example to drive the point home.
Science, like we already know, shows us that our body is in continuous state of change. The cells that made our body died and created anew in billions every few days. In fact, some claims that every single cell we currently have at this moment will be completely replaced in 7 years' time. If you are no longer composed of the original cells that had been you 7 years ago, are you still you? Or when did you become someone else? These questions are tough to answer if we got ourselves confused with the logic laid in the puzzles. However, if we shift our perspective to what Buddha was trying to say, we will see that the answer lies in how we conceptualize the self itself. In the first puzzle, we were led to believe that the ship of Theseus is a self that is certain. The puzzle treats the concept of the ship that belongs to Theseus as something static and will forever be one after its birth, when in fact, the ship of Theseus is itself because it is recognized as one. If we were to look at the nature of the ship carefully, we will see that the ship is what it is because of many reasons. For one, it was a ship. It's in the shape of one, so we recognize it as one. Secondly, it was bestowed to Theseus. That man's name is definitely Theseus, and now the ship is his. It's also because Theseus accepted the ship. And lastly, because everyone involved recognized it as the ship that belongs to him. They all say, that's the ship of Theseus. Despite all the changes occurred, the ship of Theseus remains itself as it is not a static concept, self, or entity immune to change. It is a continuous self that accumulated changes over time and still remains what it is, as long as it is regarded as one. So instead of arguing whether it's still the same or different, one might be able to say that the ship of Theseus is the ship of Theseus because everyone says so, and it will be until the people stop saying so.
Kobayashi Maru.
We are the same, despite the fact that the cells in our bodies are being constantly replaced, and that we are essentially a collection of new cells every 7 years or so. No one would deny we are not who we are because of that. Every one of us would profess that we are who we are because we are more than just a clump of cells. I am who I am because of so many things that comprises to be me. All the cells, the neurons, my flesh, my bones, and all the memories I have about myself are what made me, me. Not only that, I am who I am also because people recognize me as such. My girlfriend recognizes me as her boyfriend. My family recognizes me as their kin. And the people on the internet recognize me because I put my information on Facebook that shows who I am. Despite all the changes on cellular level, I am who I am for the same reason the ship of Theseus is the ship of Theseus despite the brand new parts. I am a continuous iteration of myself through space and time. A movement recognized as a self that is slowly unfolding its nature throughout reality. Thus, we might be able to conclude that the self, as we know, is just a construct of the mind, and we collectively agree that something is something, because it is something. What we call a self is nothing but a continuous movement of being that exists in this reality which we observe, recognize, and interact with, according to the meanings we assign to them. Self can be affected by decay or changes due to spatial circumstances, or simply because people stop adhering to their regards for it. Therefore, there's no static self, but a fluid one. It is subject to decay and death, just like everything else.
Try googling long exposure light painting.
Now, with those examples, we will start to see that the self we believe to be true is indeed quite fragile. It heavily leans on public recognition and acceptance. This idea sometimes mistaken for a nihilistic proclamation that self is not real and that nothing matters. If all are the constructions of the mind towards the continuous movements of beings, why do we care about anything? However, to understand that self is fluid is, to me, quite liberating. Sometimes in life, we fall prey to suffering because we believe something to be true, to be unchangeable, to be a self. But if self is not true in the sense that it will always be what it is forever, that would mean the suffering you feel, recognized, and attached to is also impermanent. Regardless of how strong the self is constructed, it can always be affected by changes like we already discussed, and will eventually cease its existence, one way or another. When we learn to recognize the fluidity of self, we learn that our suffering is just a movement that would come to pass if we know how to masterfully introduce changes into the equation.
How about this one for size?
Lousy Davy sucks at football. You are Davy. You suck at football at the age of 7. You love football, but you just cannot do anything meaningful when you're actually on the field. Your first touch is abysmal. You cannot juggle the ball. Passing to your teammates proves to be an extreme challenge. You have earned the nickname Lousy Davy. Itself is born.
But lousy Davy is just something you are called by your peer, your coach, your math teacher, and the local priest. But it's not forever. Just now.
If you mistake self as static, you might mistake that, dang, I'm a bad footballer. This is not me. I should be doing something else. But since you know that self is fluid, you recognize that this is just a part of a bigger movement. Your life is a long, long way from here, and you are now just 7 years old. So, you masterfully introduce smart changes to that self of yours. You practice passing, touching, dribbling, and shooting. After 6 months of grueling work, you started to improve. Now, you can touch the ball nicely. Your passes are not too shabby, and sometimes you score goals. Because of the changes you introduced into your life, the Lousy Davy self starts to decay, and eventually Lousy Davy is gone, and King Davy is born instead. Now let me take you back to something we already discussed. Let's consider the breathing exercise again. Remember when we say that your breathing cycle is governed by the law of impermanence? It's also governed by the law of non-self too. As we already established, the breathing cycle is indeed a cycle. It starts with a movement and it ends only for the next one to begin again. Each breath you take is like the cells in your body. Your breaths are being replaced every moment you breathe in or out. Every time you inhale, that's your inhaling self. Every time you exhale, that's your exhaling self. The inhaling you dies and the exhaling you emerges. Always in motion, never a frozen frame in time. Regardless of the number of cycles, you are you as continuous movement of being who breathes and never the breath itself.
And if that is true, it means no matter how tough your life is, the conditions you are in are not forever. It means things can always get better.
To summarize, Buddha taught that all things share these 3 qualities. 1. All is impermanent. Nothing stays forever. All shall come to pass. Number 2. All experience carries suffering. Everything that occurs and observed by us tends to cause us some sort of dissatisfactory. This is normal. Number 3. No self is fixed or eternal. Whatever birthed into existence is not static. Thus, there is no eternal self. It means things can always get better or worse. Depends on the future changes. Understand these deeply, and you begin to understand reality itself, or at least reality according to Buddha. I hope that it will not be too much to crunch, although I have to accept that it took me some time to make it clear to myself. But don't worry, the you that still do not understand what I'm talking about is not forever. According to Buddha, if you continue your study in Buddhism, the you that understands this would eventually emerge. And maybe you might be able to find the path out of suffering as Buddha promises.
Next time we are going to explore the idea of dependent origination and the interconnectedness of all things, according to the Buddha. If you like what you see, please stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.